What's going on, everybody? It's Riseol coming at you with a brand new video, and is that a tier list? At this time of year, at this time of day, on this part of YouTube, localized entirely on the Aurora YGO YouTube channel? Yes. May you see it? No. Okay, jokes aside, yes, I am finally doing a tier list again. It has been so long since I've done a tier list. I genuinely did not have a picture of any Tenpai or Yubel monster on my PC, and I had to actually download some specifically for this video. It's crazy. I want to try and get back into the swing of things when it comes to doing my content regularly. You can see that with my Sleeper Sunday lately. I've been trying to get back into that. And I also want to try and get back into, my monthly tier list, my bi-monthly hand trap and board breaker tier list, stuff like that if I can, because I want to hard focus on YouTube a lot more now that I've gotten out of my funk. Personal stuff aside, though, the biggest reason that I'm providing this tier list is not just because we got YCS Anaheim, which was the main reason why I was going to make this tier list in the first place and had it ready, but we also got a surprise ban list announcement at the end of the stream. Well, it's not quite a surprise if they, revealed it during the stream that they were going to show it, but it was a surprise that they were going to do that in the first place, because this is something that we don't see Konami do very often, and I'm hoping a lot of people end up expressing their enjoyment of it, because I think that it was a very cool way to announce the ban list, and definitely something that a lot of people want to see in the future. But this was the first event after the release of Crossover Breakers, which is the newest deck build pack in the card game, which is actually shocking due to having very strong decks right off the bat, compared to a lot of other deck build packs. We won't talk about Ryuji in this set, it's fine, we only care about Malice and Riseol. But it also shook up the meta because of the release of that ban list, and so I think a lot of things are tipping in the power scale of things. But with that being said, I'm not going to waste any more time. Let's go ahead and get right into my competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Tier list for the December 2024 format, post YCS Anaheim and ban list. Starting off, let's address the reptile in the room, that being Snake Eyes. Now, Snake Eyes arguably took the biggest hit on this Forbidden and Limited list due to the banning of original Sinful Spoils Snake Eye, which is just an absolutely massive hit to the deck for so many reasons, and really hurts me because I just picked up the whole deck and got 1 locals out of it. Losing original Sinful Spoils gets rid of Poplar's best search target, one of the Yubel Star's best search targets, your best starter / extender, and also the card that allows you to splash Snake Eye with so many other strategies, namely the Fire King strategy, which is one of the most popular builds of Snake Eye due to just how insane the Fire King engine works with it. But all of that is gone now, and while Snake Eye still has its plays of going Snake Eye Ash into Princess Whale IP, stuff like that, because you don't need original Sinful Spoils for that, and while the Yubel Star can still do Azamina things on top of that, so you could technically get a multi-disruption end board, it's not really consistent because Ash and Poplar are still at 1. Poplar lost its best search target, and I don't think it's nearly as powerful, I should say, as it is, because it can't really play through as many disruptions without original Sinful Spoils, and it loses a lot of its follow-up. In a format like this, where every single card counts in your hand, it's not amazing to have a deck like that. So I think genuinely, this bumps Snake Eye all the way down to Rogue tier. I think that it is such a massive hit to this deck and any other build of the deck, the Fire King build, the Azamina build, literally the Fiendsmith build, literally every other build of it that you want to play, that I feel at least until Ash bare minimum comes to 3, there's not really a good reason to play Snake Eye anymore, which is very unfortunate because they just reprinted all the stuff, and I guess it's just how Konami rolls. A similar thing can be said about Fire King in general, and I have it separate from Snake Eye because while there are Fire King Snake Eye variants, there are also a lot of pure Fire King lists running around. And I think that Fire King actually fares a little bit better than Snake Eye in this regard, because while Snake Eye does have its best starter being Ash, completely limited, same with Poplar, Fire King technically doesn't have any of its cards directly impacted. You still have 3 copies of Ponix, you have 3 copies of Volcanics, which is very huge, and there's still a lot of different plays that you can do. Again, very similar to the Snake Eye board, you can go for stuff like the Princess with the Whale, but you actually fare a lot better into board breakers. You just didn't have really as much room for non-engine, but if you cut the Diabell Star package, if you're not doing any Adamina shenanigans or any Fiendsmith stuff, anything like that, you can actually still have a lot of room for non-engine, such as hand traps or board breakers this format. I think the deck is still definitely very viable and very strong, but I feel like in terms of top cut and general representation, due to all the other decks that you can currently play, such as the ones straight out of crossover breakers, of course, there's just not going to be a lot of people wanting to play this over something like those, which is why I feel like I'm going to put it in the tier 2 category, because I think it'll definitely snag a top or 2 here and there, but I feel like overall the deck will definitely fall out of a lot of popularity. Next up we have Yubel, and Yubel was actually put into an interesting spot because while they did get Phantom of Yubel to 1, they also got Opening of the Spirit Gates to 3, and I'm pretty sure the deck still plays that engine, so they kind of got a trade-off there compared to all the other decks that got hit. It feels weird because it feels like the deck wasn't hit nearly as much as it should have been, especially after it being so good for a decent while now with Phantom of Yubel being released. And I feel like the one Phantom of Yubel, while it was a good hit because that card was just absolutely insane and being able to just make it every single turn was ridiculous, it definitely still feels like it's very strong. I feel like it'll definitely get overshadowed by Riseol and Malice with crossover breakers, so I feel like the representation isn't going to be as much as those decks, so I will put it in the tier 1.5 category, but I think this deck is definitely still very strong, even if it doesn't fare as well into things like, evenly matched, for example, even though Unchained Soul of Rage being 3 disruptions on its own is kind of insane. And depending on its hand, it can't really play through as many disruptions as a lot of other decks, but you can still easily just go Phantom with stuff in your hand to get rid of a hand trap and then keep going. I feel like it can also be pretty decent against Riseol, even though Detonator isn't once per chain because someone at Konami thought that was a good idea. I feel like going second will probably be its biggest weak point, but I think going first, Yubel can still set up some of the most insane boards in the game, and I don't feel like it's going to go anywhere crazy far away anytime soon. Finally, out of the top, basically big 4 decks, if you count Fire King separately, of the last format, we have Tenpai, which got hit very, very hard on this list. We already had Sengen summoning at 1, but now we also have Chundra and Sengen Kaiman at 1, so they lose a massive amount of consistency. And even though people are trying to cope on things like Mass Dragon, I don't really think that the deck's going to be super great anymore. You do still have Shifter and Fualos and Perulia and stuff like that, but you lost a massive amount of consistency if you were playing Tenpai, which is really, really big, so I feel like I want to put it in the rogue category. I genuinely feel like this deck, even though it still technically can do all the things it does, because it can pull it off less consistently and it was already a bit of a clunky deck after the Sengen summoning limit, I feel like people will just flock to playing literally anything else. Moving on to the stars of the show, we have the decks out of crossover breakers. Starting off with Riseol, I'm going to put this as the very first deck in the tier 1 category. Riseol did very, very well at YCS Anaheim. I believe it had the highest amount of slots in Top Cut. And the interesting thing about Riseol is that it's so strong, but it's so simple, honestly. There's so many different things that you can do to play around different hand traps. You can play around Droll pretty easily. You can play around Nib. There's so many different ways to just make 2 level 4s into a Detonator and just have, at least 3 disruptions that it's kind of crazy. You can play after things like Dark Ruler with your Hole Thruster. You can get rid of monster effects with your Field Spell. You can have up to potentially 7 or 8 disruptions off of Detonator itself before Supreme Darkness. We're not even going to talk about Supreme Darkness, okay? And it can play around hand traps basically like they don't exist. And so this deck is just really, really consistent at what it does, and what it does, while very compact, is very, very resilient. You can Kaiju it, they summon it back with plug-in. You activate a Forbidden card, they change its effect, pop it, summon it back with plug-in. You can get rid of it with an Ultimate Slayer. They use Hole Thruster in the graveyard, or whatever it's called now, to Xyz summon again. There's just so many different things that you can do to just keep bringing that Detonator back. And then a immediate, not once per chain, sorry, pop effect is just kind of insane to me. Not to mention how many hand traps it can play in its deck because of how small its engine is, and also you can play the Fiendsmith engine as seen from Triff's winning list, so there's just a lot of different things you can do with Riseol. It's genuinely kind of crazy. Next up, we also have Malice from Crossover Breakers, which I also think I want to put in the tier 1 category, even though it's a little bit early. Definitely after it gets its new support that's on the horizon, it's going to be like way better. But I think even right now, Malice is probably just a little bit underexplored compared to Riseol, and I feel people are more prepared for Malice than Riseol because it's a little bit harder to prepare for Malice because they only really fold to certain hand traps. And by certain hand traps, I mean like Lancia and Nibiru, and even then, I mean like depending on the build they're playing, they can still do stuff. I mean, like the Sky Striker build, for example, can still set up a couple of disruptions installed until the Lancia ends up running its course, and they can just do stuff on their next turn. The end boards that this deck can put out off of just one card is ridiculous, because not only is it a lot of disruption, it's layered disruption. You have things in the graveyard to worry about, you have things in the hand to worry about, you got back row, you got a really big terahertz or whatever just sitting there, constantly sending things. They're going to summon more things on your turn, they have things that interact with your graveyard, your field. There's just so many different things to worry about that it's almost impossible to settle on a proper board breaker. I think the only thing I can think of as a good board breaker would be Evenly if you also have a bait or negate for the Save Worm, because other than that, there's just so much to keep up with. And this deck actually ignores a lot of other hand traps as well. There's not really much things that you can ash other than certain effects like White Binder's effect to summon back or the effect to search for the spell. You can imperm them, but then if they have one of the traps set, then they can chain that, or they can even use Signet Backdoor, which some lists are playing, which I think is very funny to see in the year of our Lord 2024. Similar to Riseol, it just ignores a lot of hand traps, but it's less like ignoring them as in just playing through them, but just straight up, hey, I don't care what hand trap that is, I'm gonna pretend I do not see. Overall, I think it's a very strong deck that I feel like once it gets explored more compared to Riseol, we'll definitely see a lot more results. Even though the blowouts affect them a little bit harder than Riseol's blowouts affect them, except for like exactly Dimensional Barrier, I feel like that Malice is going to be very strong, especially in the future. Next up on our list, we have Labyrinth, and while Labyrinth I don't think did super well at Anaheim, I feel like it's a deck that a lot of people are going to fall back more on, especially once we get into a format where Riseol is just like the #1 clear competitor, compared to, you know, obviously Malice and stuff like that. But with Riseol being such a good deck, remember that Labyrinth has immediate access to Dimensional Barrier directly from their deck at any time off of Lady Labyrinth of the Silver Castle. So between that and then other things that you can do, I think that it's like, which one is it? I think is it Full Force Virus or Deck Devastation Virus? Yeah, Deck Devastation Virus actually works on every Riseol monster except for exactly Ice Riseol, which I think is really funny. So in theory, you could also do that. And then I'm pretty sure there's going to be plenty of things that you can do against Malice as well that you can set from deck, and I feel like going second isn't going to feel as terrible for Lab once we go into this format, because, I mean, while Riseol popping your stuff every time you activate a trap can be annoying, that can always give you a chance to activate something like a Solemn Strike, you know? As much as it pains me to say it, I feel like a more trap-focused build of Labyrinth compared to the Furniture build will probably be the better way to play the deck, due to things like Detonator being so damn strong every time you activate an effect, so you'll never really get the choice to actually use the thing that you set. But I think now that things like Tenpai and Snake Eye and Fire King have all fallen out of favor, we'll see a lot more people playing Labyrinth as a valid strategy, and I think it is very strong going into the future. Speaking of very strong into the future, we have Memento, and Memento actually did sneak its way into top cut, if I recall correctly, at least in like top 32 at Anaheim, and I think that this deck is actually very strong. There's quite a few one-card combos, it's decently resilient into hand traps, and of course it's one of the better decks to utilize the Fiendsmith engine, which is very strong also into hand traps. I was actually playing against Memento Fiendsmith at one point, and it took all of my Runic and Live Twin disruptions, or technically not all my Live Twin disruptions because I ended up eating a Talents, which went into the Fiendsmith combo. But it took all my Runic disruptions just to stop the Fiendsmiths, and I had one left over for the Memento thing, and then they chained the Quick Play spell that made it irrelevant, and so I kind of just got completely screwed over, and it feels like there's not enough disruptions to stop this deck once it gets the ball rolling, and once it opens its engine and the Fiendsmith engine. Who would have knew that their body being a temple that turns full combo into SP pass would be that strong? Next up on our list we have Mermail, and I don't think Mermail did very well at Anaheim, but I don't think it was super represented either. I think it made up like 1% of the bracket or something like that. I feel like it was definitely very underexplored, because people wanted to play it safe, you know. But I think that Mermail will be actually like decent going into the next format, not like super strong, because it already does struggle going second, and into Riseol I don't think it'll do super great without a board breaker. I mean, hell, even Malice can hit your normal summon of your Neptibus if you like try to do that as your starting card, so you have to see a bunch of hand traps or a board breaker. But I feel like with Shifter being a card definitely for Malice, of course, it's not great into the other decks of the format, especially the mirror match or anything, so Shifter being good in those decks will then end up making it bad. It's the Shifter paradox that everyone always talks about here on YouTube anyway. If Shifter's good in a top deck, then Shifter ends up being bad to play in that top deck because those top decks are super represented and you don't want to Shifter them. So basically I feel like Shifter will fall out of play a little bit because of Riseol and Malice being basically the top decks, and so that'll make Mermail have at least a little bit of breathing room when it comes to that. But otherwise, this might just be me coping because I had to pivot to Mermail because it was the only other good deck I had after Original got banned. Another deck that managed to sneak its way into Top Cut at Anaheim, I believe, was a singular voiceless voice player. And while I will put my personal bias aside because I don't really like this deck very much, I will admit that it's probably not terrible, at least. Going first, it'll probably be difficult for a lot of people to play through your board if you can also set up other disruptions. I feel like the voiceless disruptions on their own just aren't super great. Seravis can be very nice, though, for something like the Detonator or for anything that would otherwise try to break your board. I feel like it's definitely a very consistent deck. You have 3 pre-prep and stuff like that. You have 3 low. You have all your access to that. Even if I feel like it is a little bit of a slower deck, like that doesn't set up as much disruption, I feel like there's probably some certain things that you can do with it, and at the end of the day, I'm pretty sure you can play the Fiendsmith engine in here, so you can probably just slap that in there, play through hand traps, and set up extra disruptions like a Desiree. Alright, baby, Airlifter is finally at 3, which means Rescue Ace is still a rogue deck. It's not great, admittedly. I feel like maybe, no, I don't want to put it above Tenpai, because I feel like people will actually like try and play Tenpai more, even though people actually tried Rescue Ace at this event, which was crazy. But with the banning of Original Sinful Spoils, you lose your immediate access to Hydra from deck, you lose a lot of recursion with your Original Sinful Spoils, you lose your draw power off the Wanted engine in general. So while you do have Airlifter at 3, and that is still technically your full combo, it doesn't feel nearly as great as it did having the Bellstar, which was basically the only reason this deck was ever meta in the first place. But shit, man, I mean, if you can actually get the end board out consistently, it is very strong, and I'm pretty sure most decks can't play entirely through it, so you do you. And finally, we have Branded, which got all the good locks removed, aka Jowgen and Gimmick Puppet Nightmare, because the other ones either don't work very well or and are inconsistent or are way too easy to out, and still didn't get Branded Fusion back to 3, so yeah, I just want to talk about this deck because it was technically on the list of things that got affected by the list. I don't feel like anyone's going to be trying Branded anytime soon anyway. It definitely fell off ever since Branded Fusion got put to 1 when it was already basically a tier 2 strategy, which definitely felt very bad. But now, especially with the only like instant guaranteed win combos being gone with the Gimmick Puppet Nightmare lock, it kind of just completely fell off the face of the earth, which is sad because I definitely did enjoy this deck when I played it. Alright, y'all, that's going to do it for my tier list for December 2024, post-Anaheim and post-ban list. This might be a little bit, like, clunky, the video overall and the list, of course, because this is my first time getting back into the tier list scene, but I mostly just wanted to talk about decks that actually either performed at Anaheim, were represented decently at Anaheim, or, have potential in the future, and or they're affected by the ban list. So that's why there's only like 12 different decks here compared to like the 20 plus that I sometimes do. Plus, I feel like it'll make the video not nearly as long or exposition-y, and it made everything feel a lot shorter and sweeter. But I think that this is a decent representation in my opinion, at least with the top decks. The tier 2 and lower decks we might end up seeing change a little bit due to representation, such as, you know, Fire King and stuff like that. But I don't know, that's just my opinion. Let me know in the comments below and tell me what you are playing this format, because that's going to do it for the video. video. If you liked it, please sure to leave a like, as I'll put this video and the channel into the YouTube recommended, and if you like this content and you're somewhere like the rest of my tier list, I will try and bring out more again in the future, then perhaps consider subscribing and turning on notifications, because support your channel or anything else, and it's absolutely free. If you want to support me directly though, while getting some awesome TCG merchandise in the process, check out Tapio cards and link down below, use code Aurora5 for 5% off your purchase at checkout, and support me financially, and also be sure to check out my Patreon down below to see what you can get for my $1 and $5 tiers. But once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.